Maplewood Hills had a cultivated charm. Neat lawns, matching mailboxes, and pristine sidewalks that seemed to shine in the midday sun. Even the dogwoods were planted in measured intervals, as though nature itself had agreed to abide by the strict guidelines of the Homeowners Association. Everything was orderly, almost too orderly. Neighbors rarely broke the rules, because nobody wanted a letter from the board. They claimed it was all for the uniform beauty of the neighborhood. Yet, behind those manicured hedges and homogeneous facades, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Claire Danvers learned this the hard way on her first night in her newly purchased home. She was a semi-retired nurse who had come to Maplewood Hills for a quieter pace of life. She'd spent decades in bustling hospital corridors, hearing overhead pages for beeps, the frantic shuffle of doctors' feet. The idea of a tranquil neighborhood with a sense of community appealed to her. After all, she was nearing 60. It was time to settle somewhere pleasant and safe. On moving day, she quickly discovered that Maplewood Hills' brand of safe included a binder titled HOA Regulations, a handy residence guide, which spanned well over 100 pages. In her former life, Claire had never bothered with homeowner committees. She'd grown up in a small town where everyone minded their own business. If your fence needed repair, you fixed it. If you want a new porch swing, you hung it. Simple as that. Maplewood Hills was different. Here, something as minor as planting a flowering bush without board approval could lead to a fine. One of the most peculiar rules was the ban on permanent backup generators. Portable ones were subject to a complicated permit process and had to be hidden away at times designated by the board. Whenever Claire asked neighbors about it, they'd shake their heads or mutter something under their breath like, "You don't want to fight that battle." The reason behind the generator ban was murky. Some said noise complaints spurred the decision, while others claimed that the board's president, Meredith Sullivan, believed that the generator units cluttered backyards and lowered the neighborhood's visual harmony. Claire found that phrase hilarious, until she realized they really meant it. Any sign of a generator was quickly followed by an official citation on one's door. It wasn't that Claire was eager to buy a generator. She just couldn't understand the fuss. Then she met Harriet Johnson, the dialysis patient who lived 3 houses down. Harriet was a delicate woman in her early 70s, her shoulders hunched from chronic pain, her eyes often ringed with the tired look of someone who'd spent too many hours tethered to a dialysis machine. Claire introduced herself with a plate of homemade cookies. In return, Harriet graciously welcomed her inside for tea. Harriet's living room was lined with crocheted blankets, family photos, and small medical supplies. A bulky dialysis machine stood in the corner, humming like an ever-present reminder of her condition. Harriet explained she did treatments at home every other day to avoid the long journey to the hospital. While she looked frail, her voice was strong with conviction when she mentioned the ban on backup generators. She told Claire, "I've tried reasoning with the HOA for years. My machine needs power. I've written letters, gone to board meetings, even offered to cover all installation costs myself. They won't budge." "It's ridiculous," Claire said, shaking her head. "What happens if the power goes out?" Harriet gave a resigned shrug. "I keep a small portable generator, but the rules on storing it are so convoluted. And the neighbors complain about noise. The last time I tried to run it for a test, I got a letter saying I'd face fines if I ran it again without approval. They threatened me with legal action if I didn't remove it from sight. They say it disrupts the aesthetic or something." Claire's jaw tightened. She remembered her hospital days and how many patients depended on power-hungry medical devices. One prolonged outage could turn lethal for Harriet. "Why don't you move?" she asked softly. "This is a fight that could cost you more than money." Harriet managed a half-smile. "This is my home. I've lived here for decades, and I don't want to leave my memories just because a handful of people think a generator is an eyesore. Besides, everything else here is comfortable for me. The single-story layout, the ramp out front. Uprooting all that at my age, it's too much." Claire promised to keep Harriet's predicament in mind. As the weeks passed, she began attending HOA meetings, hoping to understand the board's policies and maybe build alliances. Meetings were held at the community clubhouse every second Tuesday. Each session attracted a handful of residents and a panel of 5 board members perched behind a long table. Meredith Sullivan presided with a steely grace, peering over half-moon glasses at the audience. She had the final word on everything. At the next meeting, Claire brought up the generator ban during the open forum. She described Harriet's situation politely, emphasizing the medical necessity. A hush fell over the room when she spoke. Some neighbors gave sympathetic nods, but the board remained unmoved. Meredith clutched the gavel a bit tighter. "Our rules are there for a reason," she said. "We cannot allow exceptions. The entire neighborhood's harmony depends on uniform compliance." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Harmony? She thought of Harriet's pained face, the tubes, and the machine that kept her alive. She left the meeting with a sinking feeling. Harriet was alone in this battle, and soon there might come a day when the lights flickered and her dialysis machine stilled. After the tense HOA meeting, Claire started knocking on neighbors' doors to rally support. She reasoned that if enough people expressed concern, maybe the board would relent. It seemed logical, majority rule in a community, right? But Maplewood Hills played by different rules. At first, many neighbors welcomed Claire's presence. They offered her iced tea, complimented her on the roses she'd planted, within compliance of height and color restrictions, of course, and asked politely about her day. Yet once she broached the subject of amending the generator policy, the atmosphere in each tidy living room grew thick with discomfort. "I see where you're coming from, dear," said Carol Reed, a retiree with a passion for crocheting doilies. "But you don't want to anger the board. Some folks tried to fight them before, and it got real ugly." She set down her glass with a trembling hand. Fines stacked up, and the rumors they started telling people those folks were irresponsible with their properties. It becomes a nasty cycle until they either give in or move out. At house after house, Claire encountered an identical refrain: sympathy, but no willingness to challenge the status quo. Fear was thick in the air, and the board's influence had deep roots. Once, she even found a citation stuck in her own mailbox because she left her car parked on the street overnight. A minor misstep, but a clear message that the board's watchful gaze spared nobody. The only person who seemed entirely unafraid was Hank Barnes, a widower with a booming voice and a collection of antique radios in his garage. Hank had lived in Maplewood Hills for over 30 years and recalled when it was a modest neighborhood without a fancy name. He'd been on the board in its early days, back when they existed primarily to coordinate holiday decorations and manage the small community pool. Over time, new residents with bigger ideas took over. Hank lost re-election 15 years ago to Meredith Sullivan by a wide margin. Meredith has contacts in local real estate boards, local politics, Hank explained. She's not just the board president. She's influential in city council circles. Folks around here either kiss the ring or get run out of town. I tried to speak up about Harriet's situation last year. Next thing I knew, the board threatened to fine me for my radio antenna that's been on my roof for decades. He scoffed, swirling the last dregs of coffee in his cup. They said it violated the visual aesthetic. Just an excuse to shut me up. Claire felt anger rising. "But this is Harriet's life on the line," she said. "Surely they can't ignore that." Hank's eyes softened. "They'll turn a blind eye, same as always. Until the unthinkable happens." The unthinkable. That phrase echoed in Claire's mind late into the night. She'd seen what power outages could do at the hospital. Ventilators shutting down, medication fridges warming up. Harriet's dialysis machine was no different. All it took was a few hours with no electricity for toxins to build up in her blood. Over the next few weeks, rumors of a significant storm started swirling on the local weather channels. The meteorologists predicted strong winds, heavy rain, and the distinct possibility of widespread power outages. Claire's concern for Harriet grew urgent. She knocked on Harriet's door one afternoon to check on her. "It's just a storm," Harriet insisted, though her eyes wavered. "I have that small portable unit in my garage. I'll run it if it comes to that." "But the board," Claire started. "I'm done worrying about them," Harriet said in a low voice. "My health comes first." Before Claire left, Harriet insisted on making them both a cup of peppermint tea, her favorite. They sat in the living room, surrounded by the gentle hum of medical equipment. Claire asked Harriet about her family, try to lighten the mood. Harriet spoke of her late husband, the children who visited during holidays, and how she once dreamed of traveling to Europe. She wanted to see the tulips in the Netherlands, the castles in Germany. Over the years, her condition worsened, and the dialysis routine became a cage she couldn't escape for more than a day. "You'd love those places," Claire said softly. Harriet gave a small smile. "I love it here, too," she replied, looking around at her cozy living room. "Despite everything with the HOA, this house holds my memories. I just wish they'd let me live in peace." A few days later, the sky darkened. Winds rattled the shutters, and tree branches swayed dangerously close to power lines. The local news was frantic, warning of potential blackouts. Maplewood Hills was known for older infrastructure. Power lines still hung overhead, vulnerable to branches and debris. Claire sent Harriet a text. "Are you okay?" She didn't hear back. Worried, she rushed outside, only to be nearly bowled over by gusts of wind. The rain pelted her face like sharp pebbles. Stumbling toward Harriet's house, she realized how dire the storm really was. Lightning illuminated the sky in jagged bursts. Houses flickered as power surged and waned. As soon as she neared Harriet's front walk, a street lamp popped and went dark. Claire's heart pounded. She banged on Harriet's door, water dripping down her forehead into her eyes. No answer. She tried the doorbell. Nothing. The power must already have been cut. With apprehension, she turned the doorknob. It was locked. She pressed her ear against the solid wood, straining to hear any sign of movement, any hum from that crucial dialysis machine. But there was only the roar of the storm outside and her own ragged breathing. In the distance, a transformer blew. The entire street fell into darkness. It was happening, exactly the scenario Harriet had feared, and the HOA's iron grip on backup generators felt more sinister than ever before. Claire rushed around the house, looking for a window that might be unlocked or at least partially ajar. She found one on the side, leading into Harriet's laundry room. It was small, too small for an average adult to squeeze through easily. But desperation fueled her. She shoved the window up, reaching inside until her fingertips touched the latch, and somehow managed to open it enough to crawl through. Her knees scraped against the sill. Rain battered her back, and a sharp pang of claustrophobia pricked at her chest as she squeezed her torso through the tight space. With a graceless tumble, she landed on the laundry room floor in a puddle of water from her soaked clothing. She scrambled upright, heart hammering. The overhead light was out, of course. The entire house was dark. "Harriet!" she shouted, voice echoing against the walls. Silence. She fished a small flashlight from her jacket pocket. Its beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the hall. A trembling hush fell over the house as the storm's roar outside dulled to a background cacophony. She crept from room to room, calling Harriet's name. In the living room, the dialysis machine stood dark and silent. The faint odor of hospital-grade antiseptic lingered in the air, mocking the lifeless device. A sinking dread weighed on Claire's chest. Finally, she found Harriet collapsed in the hallway, near the bedroom door. Her body lay still against the hardwood floor. Claire's medical instincts kicked in. She dropped to her knees and checked for a pulse. It was faint, too faint. Harriet was barely breathing, eyes half-lidded, her lips parted as if searching for air. Claire swore under her breath. She needed to get Harriet to a working machine or a hospital, fast. Pulling her phone from her pocket, she saw no service. The storm must have knocked down cell towers or power lines. She had no way to call 911 from here. Even Harriet's landline phone seemed dead. Time blurred as Claire checked Harriet's vitals. Harriet was slipping. Claire leaned over her, speaking softly. "Hang on, Harriet. I'm here. We'll get you help." She thought about the portable generator Harriet mentioned. Maybe if she could power the dialysis machine. "Where is it?" she muttered, recalling Harriet said it was in the garage. Carefully, she dragged Harriet closer to the couch, propping her into a safer position, then ran for the garage. She found it behind a stack of boxes, a compact generator that looked new, with the plastic film still on some parts. Fueled and ready, presumably. Claire yanked open the garage door that led to the backyard. Rain slashed sideways, and a gust of wind threatened to topple her. She spotted a small covered patio area, maybe enough shelter to set up the generator. Her mind raced. She needed extension cords, needed to connect the dialysis machine. In the best scenario, Harriet could get enough of a treatment to stabilize her. With dogged determination, she dragged the generator outside, stubbing her toes on scattered patio furniture. The downpour soaked her all over again. It felt like an eternity before she found the thick extension cords neatly coiled on a shelf. She hauled them inside and plugged one end into the generator. But that storm was savage. Lightning cracked overhead, thunder rattled the windows. She prayed it wouldn't short the generator or cause a surge. Back in the living room, Harriet's shallow, breathing worried Claire. She quickly hooked the dialysis machine to the extension cord. Moments later, she raced outside again, heart hammering, to yank the pull start on the generator. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief washed over her. For a few seconds, the dialysis machine remained dormant, and Claire's stomach clenched with fear. Then she heard the beep, low and cautious, but unmistakable. The machine shuddered as it came online. Claire shouted with joy. She rushed to Harriet's side, carefully rolling her so that she could connect the lines. Harriet moaned softly, eyes fluttering. Claire whispered reassurances as she attached the tubes. "Just hold on," she murmured. "Hold on." The machine began to do its work, whirring softly. The overhead lights remained off, but that beep, beep, beep was the best sound Claire had ever heard. Harriet's pulse was still weak, but at least she had a fighting chance now. Claire's clothes clung to her skin, and her teeth chattered from cold and adrenaline. She tried to gather blankets and towels to keep Harriet warm. Time dragged in anxious increments. Each flicker of lightning made her worry the generator might fail or the machine might short. But minute by minute, Harriet's breathing steadied. When Harriet finally opened her eyes fully, a tear slid down Claire's cheek. "It's okay," Claire soothed. "We're getting you stable." Harriet's lips quivered. "Thank you," she whispered. Then her expression hardened. "I should have never let them scare me. The HOA, Claire pressed Harriet's hand gently. "Don't talk. Save your strength." Eventually, Claire had to check if help was coming. She retrieved her raincoat, mustered her courage, and ran outside. The street was a war zone of downed branches and shattered glass. A large oak had toppled near the corner, taking a swath of power lines with it. Transformers were popping in the distance. No wonder the entire block was dark. If she could just get to her own car, maybe she could drive Harriet to the hospital. But her eyes fell on the flooded road, which looked more like a raging creek than a street. Travel seemed impossible. Returning inside, she saw Harriet dozing fitfully, the dialysis machine still running. A fierce gratitude mingled with anger in Claire's heart. This was what Harriet had feared, what the board had willfully ignored. A single machine could mean life or death, and the board's fixation on aesthetics had nearly cost Harriet her life tonight. Claire shuddered at the near tragedy, vowing not to let it slide. Rain battered the roof, thunder rumbled, but Harriet was breathing, living proof that sometimes doing the right thing meant defying an unjust rule. And as long as the storm raged, Claire would stand guard, ready to protect Harriet from the dark that lurked both outside and within Maplewood Hills' unyielding governance. By dawn, the storm had finally moved on, leaving Maplewood Hills in a soggy wreck. Fallen trees, smashed fences, and shattered windows made the once immaculate streets look like a disaster zone. The sunrise revealed how thoroughly the neighborhood's uniform beauty had been battered by nature's fury. Nearly every house had some damage. The carefully standardized mailboxes lay strewn about like fallen dominoes, and broken shingles carpeted the lawns. Inside Harriet's living room, the generator still hummed dutifully. A few hours of consistent dialysis had stabilized her, though she remained weak and groggy. Claire paced around, watching from the window as the board's so-called Emergency Response Committee trotted around with clipboards, assessing damage. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved they'd finally shown up or furious that they were more concerned about upholding rules than checking on vulnerable residents. When Harriet mustered enough strength to speak, she looked at Claire with a weary determination. "I'm ready to fight this," she said in a frail voice. "For years I've just let them roll over me." Claire nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "You nearly died last night. I can't let them pretend this was just an inconvenience." They were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Claire peered through the window and saw two board members standing on the porch, Meredith Sullivan and another man Claire recognized as Tom Holloway, the HOA secretary. Both wore expressions as dark as the morning sky had been just hours before. Claire answered the door, eyes narrowed. Meredith looked impeccable, her hair pinned back, her clothes immaculate despite the chaos everywhere else. She spared a glance at the generator's roar, and her lips pursed. "Claire, Harriet," she began, sounding concerned, yet managing a clipped tone. "We're glad to see you're well. We understand there was some difficulty here last night." Claire wanted to laugh at the understatement, but held her tongue. Harriet was still too frail to stand, so Claire folded her arms across her chest. "Harriet nearly died from a power outage, and your precious rules about generators almost sealed her fate." Meredith's expression flickered, but she regained composure. "We understand Harriet has medical needs, but we have guidelines for how and when temporary generators can be used, as well as how they should be stored. This is to maintain property values and ensure the safety and comfort of all residents." "Safety and comfort?" Claire's voice rose. "Please, tell me how Harriet losing access to her dialysis machine promotes safety and comfort." Tom stepped in, fiddling with the pen clipped to his pocket. "We do allow portable generators with approval, but they must follow noise ordinances and be placed out of sight. This is to prevent disturbances." Claire's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Yes, sorry Harriet's survival might have disturbed the neighbor's sleep." Meredith's cheeks flushed. She cleared her throat, but a slight tremor in her hand hinted that she was rattled. No one wanted Harriet in danger. "Perhaps we could review her situation at the next board meeting." From the couch, Harriet weakly called out, "I've been appealing to you for 2 years, waiting on the next board meeting. Spare me the fake concern now." Meredith adjusted her glasses. "I understand your frustration, but let's keep this civil. The storm was an unforeseen event, and we're just trying to restore order. We ask that you remove the generator as soon as practical. We'll address any exceptions at the next meeting." "Harriet is still on dialysis," Claire shot back. "We're not turning it off until we're certain she's stable or has a better solution." Meredith let out a small sigh. "I advise caution. The HOA has the authority to issue citations and fines for noncompliance. While I understand the extenuating circumstances, there must be a process." Harriet struggled to sit upright. "You'd fine me for saving my own life." Meredith gave a tight smile. "No one wants that. But rules are rules." Claire had enough. She slammed the door in their faces and locked it. She couldn't remember a time she'd felt such seething anger. Turning around, she found Harriet silently crying, tears rolling down pallid cheeks. Claire kneeled beside her, gently brushing back a strand of Harriet's white hair. "We'll fight them," she whispered. "Not just for you, but for anyone else too scared to speak up." In the following days, the storm's aftermath kept the entire neighborhood busy. The main roads reopened. Utility crews worked day and night to restore power, which flickered back on after 48 grueling hours. During that time, Harriet and Claire relied on the generator to keep Harriet's dialysis running. True to form, the board slid a citation under Harriet's door, claiming she was in violation of multiple guidelines regarding generator operation and storage. They listed potential fines in the hundreds of dollars. Harriet grew livid, but her anger fueled her determination to bring the issue public. Claire reached out to an old acquaintance in local media, a reporter named Leslie Tran, who she knew from her years working in a hospital. Leslie jumped on the story immediately, seeing the potential for a broader expose on HOAs and their sometimes oppressive tactics. She arrived with a small camera crew one crisp morning, just as Harriet was finishing a dialysis session. Harriet agreed to speak on camera, though her hands trembled with nerves. She recounted the horrifying storm, how she nearly died, and how the board had consistently blocked her from installing a permanent backup system. Claire chimed in, describing how she had to break into Harriet's house and set up the generator in the middle of a storm. The next day, the local news ran the story. It spread fast. Neighbors who once cowered in silence began to talk openly. Hank Barnes even chimed in, telling tales of how the board bullied him over his antique radio antenna. The camera panned to the battered yards and the rows of identical houses, painting Maplewood Hills as a cautionary tale of power run amok. When the segment ended, the anchor gave a disapproving shake of her head. One resident's medical emergency highlights the pitfalls of certain HOA regulations, she concluded. And then, in a twist that set the board scrambling, Harriet's story ignited a viral debate online. Social media users nationwide started commenting and sharing. Strangers across the state wrote messages of support. A petition circulated demanding Maplewood Hills to revise its generator ban. Within a week, it had thousands of signatures. Through it all, Harriet's health remained fragile. She still needed dialysis every other day, and any small setback could land her back in a hospital. But her spirit seemed renewed by the surge of public backing. One morning, she and Claire stood on her front porch, sipping tea and watching as yard crews tried to fix the storm damage. Harriet turned to Claire. "I should have fought harder sooner, but I let their intimidation get the better of me." Claire placed a reassuring hand on Harriet's shoulder. "You're fighting now," she said. "That's what matters." With the storm's damage mostly cleared and the lights back on, Maplewood Hills returned to its postcard-perfect facade, at least on the surface. Beneath that veneer, however, a groundswell of community debate threatened the very foundation of the HOA's authority. Neighbors who'd once murmured their discontent in private now openly questioned the board's rulings. Complaints ranged from petty citations about flowerbed colors to the newly illuminated danger of restricting essential medical equipment. Harriet's story had done more than put a spotlight on an overreaching HOA. It awakened a sense of shared responsibility among residents. A cluster of neighbors formed a volunteer group, calling themselves the Maplewood Unity Coalition. Claire was promptly recruited, along with Hank Barnes. They started organizing monthly meetups at Hank's spacious garage, which was outfitted with his vintage radio sets. Over coffee and donuts, the group planned how to press the board into reforming the generator policies and other draconian regulations. Meanwhile, the board scrambled to control the narrative. Meredith Sullivan penned a letter to all residents, defending the ban by citing noise levels, potential fire hazards, and property value concerns. The letter ended with a pointed reminder that all Maplewood residents were legally bound by the HOA covenants. She concluded, "We appreciate your cooperation as we strive to preserve the quality and value of our community." This did little to quell the uproar. In fact, Harriet's local news story continued to gain traction, and a more prominent regional outlet picked it up. Reporters started calling the board for comment. Many calls went unanswered. The Maplewood Unity Coalition used the momentum to draft a formal proposal, allowing permanent backup generators for residents with critical medical needs and relaxing restrictions on portable generators during emergencies. The day of the next board meeting arrived. Usually, these gatherings drew maybe a dozen residents. This time, well over 100 people packed into the community clubhouse. Some had to stand at the back because the seats were full. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Meredith Sullivan sat at the center of the board's table, flanked by her colleagues, looking visibly uncomfortable for the first time in recent memory. Claire and Harriet arrived together. Harriet moved cautiously, her energy still fragile, but she looked resolute. The crowd parted to let her take a seat at the front. Cameras from local news stations captured the moment. Harriet glanced around at the throng, her eyes brimming with gratitude, and then she locked eyes with Meredith. The board tried to run through the usual agenda: landscaping budgets, community pool repairs, next year's holiday lights. But the tension was too thick. Residents whispered impatiently, waiting for the open forum. Finally, Meredith called for public comment. It was like uncorking a champagne bottle, shaken for hours. One by one, neighbors stood to speak. They shared stories of fear, intimidation, and hidden costs. A mother worried about her asthmatic child's nebulizer needing power during outages. A retiree complained about being fined for replacing a worn-out fence without prior written approval, even though it was an emergency repair. A man in his 70s recounted how he was told to remove his wheelchair ramp for failing to submit the proper architectural plans first. The complaints piled on, illustrating a board more concerned with preserving uniformity than community well-being. Harriet was the last to speak. She rose slowly, and Claire offered her an arm for support. "I don't want to see anyone else go through what I did," Harriet began, her voice quiet but firm. "I love this neighborhood. I've lived here almost my entire adult life. I know we can be better than this." The silence was profound as Harriet recounted the storm night. She described how Claire found her unconscious, how the portable generator was her only salvation. She ended with a simple statement: "An organization meant to protect our community nearly cost me my life. That has to change." When she finished, the audience erupted in applause, something unheard of in the typically restrained environment of a Maplewood Hills HOA meeting. Meredith banged her gavel, attempting to restore order, but the applause wouldn't die down easily. Finally, with reporters scribbling notes and cameras rolling, Meredith spoke. She started by expressing sympathy for Harriet's ordeal, though the words sounded stiff. Then, in a display that shocked everyone, Tom Holloway cleared his throat. "Madam President," he said, turning to Meredith, "with all due respect, I think we need to reconsider the generator policy, especially for medical necessities." His tone was calm, but his words carried weight. He was the first board member to openly challenge Meredith in a public forum. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Meredith pursed her lips, clearly caught off guard. "We can put it to a vote," she finally said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. The next 10 minutes were tense. The board members huddled together, whispering among themselves. The audience sat in hushed anticipation. When they finished, Meredith announced, "We will permit Harriet Johnson to install a permanent backup generator for medical reasons, effective immediately, pending standard electrical inspection. As for the broader policy, we will form a committee to explore revisions that maintain our community standards but allow for health and safety exceptions." It wasn't a complete victory, but a monumental shift nonetheless. Harriet placed a trembling hand over her heart, tears shining in her eyes. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The crowd, though not erupting in cheers, began to talk excitedly. It was the first crack in the board's armor, and it came because Harriet's brush with death opened everyone's eyes to the board's potential to harm the very people it claimed to serve. In the following weeks, the Maplewood Unity Coalition kept the pressure on. They attended committee meetings suggesting practical guidelines for generators, such as sound dampening enclosures and limited usage times, compromises that balanced aesthetics with real human needs. They also pushed for transparency in how the board enforced rules. By the time final policies were drafted, Maplewood Hills had new guidelines that allowed medical exceptions, simplified the process for obtaining generator permits, and curbed the board's power to issue arbitrary fines without oversight. Harriet soon had a permanent generator installed behind her house, nestled discreetly behind evergreen shrubs. Claire stood beside her the day it was tested, listening to its smooth hum. When it clicked on without a glitch, Harriet smiled, a rare, radiant smile that seemed to breathe life into her entire being. "I feel safe for the first time in years," she said softly. Claire slipped an arm around Harriet's shoulders. "You fought for this," she said. "You stood up for yourself when it mattered most." They walked together down Maplewood Hill's newly repaired sidewalk. With each step, Harriet's pace steadied, her confidence growing. Many neighbors waved from their porches, offering warm greetings that felt genuine rather than obligatory. The heartbreak of that night's storm would never be erased, nor would the memory of how close Harriet came to losing her life. But from the wreckage, something new had taken root. A community that understood it had a responsibility to protect its most vulnerable. At her doorstep, Harriet paused. "Thank you, Claire," she said, "for saving my life. Yes, but also for reminding me I deserve to live without fear." Claire smiled. "I think we reminded each other. No more letting people get bulldozed by misguided rules. Standing there on Harriet's porch, the neighborhood seemed different. The same tidy lawns and uniform mailboxes remained, but a new spirit thrived beneath the surface. The power that had once oppressed them had shifted, maybe only slightly, but enough to give everyone a glimpse of a better way. And in that quiet moment, they both realized Maplewood Hills was no longer just Harriet's house or Claire's new residence. It had finally become a place they could truly call home. The end.